When we compare 21st century Brantford to 1st century cities in Revelation, it seems like everything is so different. Millennia of intellectual and technological advances have brought stunning progress. But human nature and human need remain the same. We still want a safe, prosperous place to raise our families, do meaningful work that does more than pay the bills, have some fun whenever we can, and worship with joy and freedom. And the challenges facing all Christians today are essentially the same as those in the 1st century. There's still incredible pressure to worship the gods of the people around us, to sell out to the materialism that defines the modern notion of success and happiness, and to embrace the values and ideas that will ensure we can get along just fine with everybody. So if Jesus were to write a letter to us, what would it say? What praise and reproof would he offer? But before we go there, let's recognize that in each of the Revelation cities, there was just one small church, compared to more than 100 congregations in this city. So if Jesus were to write a letter to the church in Brantford, conditions would vary from place to place. We're certainly in no position to offer any judgment about any of that. So all observations to come are purely about us. And perhaps the best place to start is with the 3 purposes we've always said we exist for: to reach up and glorify God, reach around to build up and encourage one another, and reach out with the life-changing message of Jesus. In other words, we're about purpose, not property, programs, or prestige. Everything we do is supposed to serve at least one of our founding principles, or we shouldn't be doing it in the first place. And those principles go back to the very beginning. It's easy to overthink this, but Jesus said there were just 2 things that were most important to him. He said, "You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. This is the first and greatest commandment." A second is equally important. Love your neighbor as yourself. Love God and love others, and a central part of both is sharing our faith with humility and gentleness. And from the start, Jesus intended his followers to achieve his purposes in and through the church. So all through the New Testament, the writers emphasize the main characteristics God wants in every collection of his people, big or small. They're all summed up in Ephesians 4. Unity, maturity, stability, responsibility, and integrity. Make every effort to keep yourselves united in the Spirit, binding yourselves together with peace, Paul says in verse 3, verses 12 and 13. The responsibility of leaders is to equip God's people to do his work and build up the church until we all come to be mature in the Lord, measuring up to the full and complete standard of Christ. Then we won't be tossed and blown about by every wind of new teaching. We won't be influenced when people try to trick us with lies so clever they sound like the truth. And as each part does its own special work, it helps the other parts flourish so the whole body is healthy and growing and full of love. So throw off your old sinful nature and your former way of life, and let the Spirit renew your thoughts and attitudes. Put on your new nature, created to be like God, truly righteous and holy. So, that's the foundation, but how are we doing with the specifics? Well, there's a really important point to remember, and it's so obvious we sometimes don't even think about it. The church is not an organization or an institution. The church is you, and me, and all of us together. So the real question is, how are you doing when it comes to love? Do you magnify the Lord, edify your brothers and sisters, and testify about the love and goodness of Jesus? Because when you put together all of our individual conditions, that's when we get a true picture of followers. None of us can deflect responsibility. With all that in mind, let's look at the spiritual conditions in this city and this church, because they affect each other. Like most modern municipalities, Brantford is increasingly multicultural, and that enriches our social fabric. But it also means we're often exposed to different religious ideas, so like the early Christians, we need to know what we believe, how we're distinctive, and when we need to stand up for principles we can't compromise. But always with love, gentleness, and humility. And despite the uncertainty gripping both the economy and the housing market, most of Brantford is still doing pretty well, and we face the same temptation as those in Revelation, who made comfort and prosperity their priority. At the same time, homelessness, addictions, and poverty are major problems, and we need to do what we can instead of growing indifferent and apathetic. In other words, the Asia Minor problems of compromise, comfort, and complacency are alive and well. To guard against them, we need to remember the good Jesus identifies in the Revelation churches. He praises them for hard work, perseverance, and patient endurance, unwillingness to tolerate evil actions, faithfulness to true doctrine, loyalty and refusing to deny Jesus, strong, growing love, faithfulness even amid hardship, service to others, and constant improvement and growth. If you're so inclined, you can hit the pause button later and rate yourself and your church on those essential criteria using a scale of 1 to 10. Now, this is only my opinion based on what I see, but I think we do pretty well when it comes to those core values we can sum up as labor, long-sufferance, love, and loyalty, with lasting improvement. We take our faith seriously, and I may not be the most objective observer, but feedback suggests our worship services do glorify God and affirm the gospel, are helpful and encouraging, and offer relevant insights for faithful living. Could they be better and less predictable? Of course, but even as they are now, our worship is authentic, heartfelt, and centered on our Father. Okay, this next bit is a bit tough for me, but we have to talk about the preaching. People aren't exactly flocking to hear me speak. I'm not charismatic or very deep, and I have a style that doesn't appeal to everyone. But I don't think anyone could argue I'm not hitting the basics or presenting the gospel in a clear way everyone can understand. The messages are Bible-centered and practical. Having said that, Susan and I are well aware of the weaknesses in our respective roles, but we work hard and try to do our best. As for the teaching and Bible classes here, they're clearly based on Scripture, and we value questions and discussion, always providing opportunities for people to share their insight and experience. I will say the level of Bible knowledge and understanding among many could be much better, but the opportunities for that are always available, and the problem seems to be one of individual initiative and not something the church isn't doing. If you want to learn more, all you have to do is show up for classes and ask for help with tools and resources, because we have lots. Until the COVID interruption, we held an annual spring retreat for about 17 years straight, and a fixture of those retreats was a congregational assessment. In every one of those years, the biggest strength of followers identified by our members was the way in which we love each other and act as a real family. Now, if you want to stay on the fringes, you can do that, and some people do. But if you're willing to be transparent and trusting, the relationships here are as good as you'll find in any church. Maybe even better. Now, let's take a quick look at some of the challenges facing the Revelation churches and us. In ancient Turkey, the problems cited by Jesus are apathy and indifference, moral and spiritual compromise, tolerating false teachers, self-reliance and overconfidence, weakening love and zeal, lukewarmness mixed with spiritual blindness, self-centered pride and prosperity, and backsliding or living on past glory. In that list, I don't think we have to worry at the congregational level about moral compromise, false teachers, or waning love. But we always have to be careful as individuals and a church about getting too complacent and comfortable at the expense of spiritual things, about relying on our own strength instead of God's, and about losing our intensity and desire to grow. It's easy to coast, just like some did in the first century. For most of our 20 years, our community outreach was defined by 3 major ministries. In the early days, our focus was kids, and we had lots of them. A large group grew up with followers, and some of the seeds planted then continued to bear fruit. But we didn't replace those young people as they got older. So when some left for school or jobs out of town, or followed their parents to bigger churches, or left the faith altogether, our Bible school gradually shrank to a mere shadow of its former self. It's one of my biggest failures. But we did rechannel our energies into the Breakfast Buddies program, which served a full sit-down meal to children at Princess Elizabeth School, one of the neediest in the city. For 10 years, we built relationships with the kids and their parents, conveyed the love of Jesus, and made a real difference in the lives of some of the poorest families in the city. And that was after we'd served for a decade at the homeless shelter. But when the pandemic hit, new regulations forced an end to the way we did things, and the breakfast program was taken over by school staff. And that was just one of many changes. Numbers-wise, we were in decline long before the pandemic, but the COVID interruption hit us hard, with a slew of deaths, people going to bigger churches with more services for their kids, and others just drifting away. Altogether, we lost about a third of our remaining people during COVID. That's pretty standard for churches across North America, but in a group as small as ours. That was huge. So now we find ourselves smaller and demographically older than at any time in our history. So like the Ephesians, we're not doing as much as we did at first, largely because we're older and smaller. But I think we all realize one of our biggest needs is to resume or replace Breakfast Buddies with a community ministry, one that will bring us together, serve the needy, and share the love of God. Meantime, Followers punches well above its weight when it comes to the financial support of aid and evangelism programs around the corner and across the world. In the last several years, we've given several $1,000s to everything from the food bank and the local pregnancy resource center to child support programs in developing nations and Ukrainian war relief. Members here are very generous, and we've been good stewards of God's many blessings. As for evangelism, we're reaching out with our newly redesigned website, our Cross-Current article that's printed in the local paper and up to 40 others across the country, our YouTube services, which have a small but loyal following outside the group, and our individual witnessing to family and friends. So, on balance, we're doing some things right, and there's plenty of room for improvement. The good news is, there's a remarkable consistency among our committed members. Like every church, we have a few on the fringes, but the committed core can always be counted on, and that's a wonderful foundation for the future. And in the last couple of months, we've had a surprising spurt of growth, and the very fact that many of you have come and stayed is a real encouragement to all of us, because it's confirmation we're doing some things well. So, thank you for that vote of confidence. Here in Brantford, what the future of Followers holds is impossible to say, but it's God's church and He will do as He sees fit. Our role is to be loving, obedient, and faithfully persistent as we hold out God's light in this community. Maybe one day our lamp will go dark, but we can ensure it's not because of pride, apathy, or compromise. So shine on, my friends. Shine on.